Something has changed around Prince William, and royal supporters believe they can feel it before the palace is ever willing to say it out loud. It is not one dramatic announcement, it is not a single headline, it is not a formal transfer of power stamped with ceremony and tradition. It is something quieter, and that may be exactly why so many people find it impossible to ignore. In the eyes of supporters, William no longer looks like a prince patiently waiting for the future. He looks like a man stepping into it early. For years, the public was told to view William through a familiar royal lens, the disciplined heir, the careful son, the steady figure being prepared for a role that would arrive one day, eventually in its proper constitutional sequence. That was the old picture, but many royal watchers now believe the old picture no longer explains what they are seeing. The gestures feel sharper, the appearances feel more deliberate, the confidence seems less inherited and more exercised, and above all, the pace feels different. That is the part drawing the most attention. Not simply that William is becoming more visible, but that he appears to be moving with a kind of quiet acceleration. Supporters are not just noticing more engagements or more polished appearances. They believe they are witnessing a shift in authority itself, the subtle kind that happens before titles change, before statements are issued, before institutions admit that the center of gravity has started to move. In royal history, the most important transitions are not always announced when they begin. Sometimes they are felt first, and that is why this moment has become so fascinating. Because to William's supporters, the question is no longer whether he is preparing for greater responsibility. The question is whether he has already started exercising it in ways the public is only now learning how to read. They point to the tone of his public role, the confidence of his appearances, the growing sense that when major questions arise, people increasingly look toward William and Catherine, not as distant future figures, but as the stabilizing answer in the present. That perception matters. In the modern monarchy, image is never just image. Presence is not just presence. Every movement is interpreted, every appearance weighed, every silence examined for meaning. Royal supporters understand that better than most. They know the institution survives not only through tradition, but through public confidence. And confidence, once it begins to consolidate around a particular figure, can change the atmosphere long before it changes the formal order. That is what makes this moment feel so charged. Part of the reason is contrast. William is not being viewed in isolation. He is being viewed against a wider backdrop of uncertainty, scrutiny, and generational transition. Whenever a royal institution appears pressured by modern expectations, whenever the public senses fatigue around older dynamics, attention naturally shifts to the figure seen as next in line to restore clarity. For many supporters, William now embodies that clarity. He appears composed where others seem burdened. He appears forward-facing where others seem tied to the weight of the past. He appears, in their eyes, less like an apprentice and more like a central force already shaping the tone of what comes next. And then there is Catherine, whose presence has only intensified this interpretation. Supporters increasingly see William and Catherine not merely as popular senior royals, but as a functioning partnership that signals readiness. Together they project something the public responds to instantly: balance, discipline, and continuity without stagnation. That combination is politically valuable, emotionally persuasive, and symbolically powerful. It allows supporters to imagine not only a future reign, but a future style of monarchy. And once the public begins imagining that future vividly enough, it becomes harder to keep it mentally filed under someday. Still, what makes this story so compelling is that it is not built on one grand revelation. It is built on accumulation. One appearance suggests confidence, another suggests command, a decision suggests strategic awareness, a public response suggests growing trust. Bit by bit, supporters connect these signals and arrive at a conclusion that feels larger than any single event. They begin to believe that William is not simply being prepared by the institution, he is beginning, in effect, to prepare the institution for himself. That is a powerful idea, and it helps explain why the conversation around him has shifted so quickly. Royal supporters are highly sensitive to momentum. They watch for it, measure it, and discuss it in almost intuitive terms. They know when a figure looks ceremonial, and they know when a figure begins to look consequential. William, to them, increasingly looks consequential. William, to them, increasingly looks consequential. The public composure, the selective seriousness, the growing sense of mission, all of it creates the impression of someone who understands that history does not always wait for the perfect moment. Sometimes it rewards the person who is ready before the institution expects him to be. So why are so many supporters suddenly convinced that William is taking control faster than expected? Because they believe control at this level does not begin with a crown. It begins with presence. It begins with credibility. It begins with the moment people stop asking who comes next and start acting as though the answer is already standing in front of them. And once that feeling takes hold, the story is no longer about a distant succession. It becomes about a transition that may already be underway in everything but name. But impressions alone do not create this kind of belief. Supporters think they are seeing patterns, and those patterns did not emerge overnight. They point to the language, the symbolism, the timing, and the increasingly unmistakable sense that William is no longer being introduced to leadership in stages. In their view, he is already inhabiting it. To understand why that conviction is spreading so quickly, we have to look at the signs supporters believe matter most. The first sign supporters point to is not a policy document or an official declaration, but a change in how William seems to carry public duty itself. For a long time, he was seen as careful, measured, and intentionally restrained, almost as though he understood that moving too far, too fast, would invite the comparisons he was trained to avoid. That caution once defined him, but supporters now believe that caution has been replaced by something firmer. They see a man who still understands restraint, yet no longer hides behind it. The difference is subtle, but in royal life, subtle differences often matter most. When William appears now, supporters say he does not merely participate, he anchors. He does not simply attend. He frames the event around himself without seeming to chase attention. That distinction is essential. In a monarchy, legitimacy is reinforced by the ability to appear central without appearing theatrical. Royal supporters believe William has become exceptionally effective at this. They see him stepping into rooms with composed authority that makes others look like supporting figures, even when the occasion itself is not formally about succession. In their eyes, that is not accidental polish. It is the behavior of someone growing comfortable with command. A second sign is timing. Supporters are paying close attention to when William speaks, when he remains silent, and when he chooses to be seen. In royal culture, timing is a language of its own. To appear at the right moment can signal steadiness. To remain quiet at the right moment can signal discipline. To step forward only when necessary can signal confidence, because it suggests a figure secure enough not to compete for attention, yet prepared to become the focus the instant circumstances require it. Many supporters believe William has mastered exactly that balance. They do not see impulsiveness, they see calibration. That calibration is part of why the idea of accelerated control has gained traction. Supporters think William is no longer merely reacting to events arranged around him. They suspect he is shaping his public role with strategic intent. Every carefully chosen appearance reinforces the image of readiness. Every composed response strengthens the perception that he is thinking several steps ahead. Even the absence of noise works in his favor. In a time when public figures often overexpose themselves, restraint can read as strength. William's supporters interpret that restraint not as hesitation, but as discipline under pressure. Then there is the matter of symbolism, a realm in which royal watchers are especially alert. Supporters know that monarchy communicates through ritual, positioning, visual hierarchy, family alignment, and the sequencing of roles. They notice who stands where, who leads what, who is trusted with which cause, and which figures increasingly appear to represent continuity. In that symbolic landscape, William has, in their view, moved beyond the posture of inheritance and toward the posture of stewardship. This is where Catherine becomes indispensable to the story. Supporters do not see William's growing authority as a solo development. They see it as inseparable from the image he projects alongside her. Together, they offer something the monarchy always needs, a promise that the future will be stable, modern enough to feel relevant, yet traditional enough to feel secure. William alone may symbolize succession, but William and Catherine together symbolize continuity. That is a far more powerful combination than popularity alone. Royal supporters respond strongly to that partnership because it seems disciplined rather than performative. They do not appear to be rushing, they appear to be ready, and readiness, in royal terms, is often more persuasive than ambition. Open ambition can unsettle a monarchy because it suggests impatience. Readiness does the opposite. It reassures the public that when the moment arrives, the institution will not wobble. Supporters increasingly believe William and Catherine are creating exactly that reassurance, and in doing so, they are becoming more than heirs. They are becoming the standard against which the rest of the royal landscape is judged. That shift in comparison is critical. Once supporters begin measuring the monarchy through William's tone instead of simply placing him within it, his perceived authority expands dramatically. He stops being one important figure among several and starts looking like the figure around whom the future is already being mentally organized. This does not require any constitutional change. It happens in public imagination first, quietly. They also notice the emotional register surrounding him. William is often discussed not merely as capable, but as dependable. That word carries enormous weight in royal culture. Dependability implies not just charm or competence, but load-bearing capacity. It implies someone who can absorb expectation without seeming overwhelmed by it. Supporters believe William increasingly projects exactly that. He looks to them like someone the institution can lean on, and once that impression becomes widespread, the public begins to treat him differently. So when they say William is taking control faster than expected, they are not necessarily describing dramatic palace ultimatums. What they are really describing is something more powerful and more difficult to reverse. They are describing a transfer of confidence. They believe the public, perhaps even the institution itself, is beginning to invest William with a level of symbolic authority that used to belong almost entirely to the future. And once authority begins to migrate in that way, formal titles start to feel less like the source of power and more like the confirmation of something already underway. But there is another reason this belief has spread so quickly. Supporters do not think William is rising only because he appears ready. They think he is rising because the monarchy itself appears to need what he represents right now. That changes everything because the story stops being about personal development and becomes a story about institutional demand. In the eyes of supporters, William is no longer simply advancing on schedule. He is being pulled forward by the pressures of the moment, and that is why so many of them believe the pace has changed. That sense of institutional demand is what gives this story its real force. Supporters are not simply admiring William in the abstract. They are reading him against a monarchy that, in their view, is under pressure to simplify itself, steady itself, and regain a clearer emotional connection with the public. In moments like that, the royal figure who appears composed, credible, and naturally aligned with the future begins to gather influence whether the palace formally acknowledges it or not. To many supporters, that is exactly what is happening now. They believe the monarchy has entered a period in which symbolism must work harder than ever. Public patience is shorter. Scrutiny is harsher. Every appearance is dissected in real time, every internal tension amplified, every shift in visibility treated as a clue. Under those conditions, supporters argue that the institution cannot rely on ceremony alone. It needs personalities who can hold public trust instinctively, figures who make continuity feel believable rather than merely inherited. William, in their view, increasingly serves that function. He offers a point of focus at a moment when focus itself has become valuable. This is why so many supporters resist the idea that his rise is simply natural succession unfolding on schedule. To them, that explanation is too passive. What they think they are watching is a monarchy adjusting consciously or unconsciously around the people who best protect its long-term stability. William's growing centrality in that reading is not a coincidence and not just a matter of popularity. It is a response to pressure. Institutions under strain tend to elevate the figures who reassure, and supporters believe reassurance is precisely what William now provides. There is also a generational dimension to this belief. Supporters often frame William not only as the next king, but as the representative of a different royal tone. He seems less tied to the old language of distance and more attuned to a public that expects discipline without stiffness, service without spectacle, and relevance without desperate reinvention. That balance is difficult to achieve. Lean too far toward tradition and the monarchy can appear frozen. Lean too far toward modernity and it can appear insecure. Supporters think William walks that line more effectively than anyone else in the family. That impression becomes stronger when they consider how future-facing he appears in contrast to the institution around him. William is still grounded in royal form, but he often gives supporters the impression of someone thinking beyond inherited habits. He seems to understand that survival in a modern monarchy is not only about preserving ritual, it is about preserving confidence, and confidence does not come from rank alone. It comes from the public sense that the person at the center of the system grasps the mood of the era. For many supporters, William appears to grasp it. This is one reason they pay such close attention to his seriousness. In another kind of public figure, seriousness can read as stiffness. In William, supporters tend to interpret it as duty-gathering weight. They see someone who looks less interested in performing royal importance than in carrying it. That distinction matters because it changes how control is perceived. A man hungry for status invites suspicion. A man who appears burdened by responsibility, yet willing to shoulder it, invites trust. Supporters believe William benefits from that difference. It allows his increasing authority to feel earned rather than asserted. And once authority feels earned, supporters begin to imagine it extending further than protocol strictly requires. That is exactly where the psychological shift seems to be happening. More and more, they talk about William not as a figure who will one day set the tone, but as someone already doing so. They look at the broader royal picture and conclude that he has become the emotional reference point for what the monarchy is trying to be: stable, modern, serious, family-centered, and disciplined. Whether that conclusion is formally endorsed is almost beside the point. In the public mind, the reference point itself carries power. Another reason the momentum feels faster than expected is that supporters think William has learned from the monarchy's vulnerabilities without becoming defined by them. They see someone who has grown up inside the institution, observed its strains at close range, and emerged with a more controlled understanding of what must change and what must not. That creates an aura of preparedness that feels deeper than training. It feels lived. Supporters often respond strongly to leaders who appear shaped by difficulty rather than protected from it, and William's image draws heavily on that idea. He is not seen as naive about the crown. He is seen as tempered by reality behind it. All of this helps explain why supporters now describe his role in language that would once have sounded premature. They speak of influence, direction, gravity, command. They are not waiting for permission to use those words because emotionally they no longer believe permission is needed. In their view, the evidence is already in front of them. The monarchy may still move according to formal order, but public belief rarely waits for official timing. It moves when confidence moves, and confidence, supporters think, is moving unmistakably toward William. That is the deeper reason this story resonates so powerfully. It is not just about one prince becoming more visible. It is about supporters sensing that the monarchy's future has begun arriving ahead of schedule. They believe William has become the figure through whom people are already interpreting stability, and once that happens, the pace of perception accelerates on its own. The public stops seeing tomorrow as distant. It starts reading tomorrow into the present. But belief alone is never enough to sustain a story like this. For it to last, supporters need gestures that look decisive, appearances that feel symbolic, and contrasts that make William's position stronger. Those moments are what have been building, and they may be the reason the conversation has shifted from admiration to open expectation. So what are royal supporters really responding to when they say William is taking control faster than expected? In the end, it comes down to a feeling that has now grown too strong to dismiss. They believe he has crossed an invisible line, the line between being prepared for leadership and quietly beginning to define it. That is why the conversation around him sounds different now. It is no longer only about promise, it is about presence, not future authority, but present weight. Supporters see that weight in the way William seems to occupy the role before officially possessing its full power. They see it in the steadiness of his image, in the discipline of his public life, and in the increasingly widespread assumption that when the monarchy needs reassurance, William will be the one expected to provide it. Expectations like that do not appear overnight. They build through repetition, through trust, and through the sense that one figure has started to look more aligned with the moment than anyone else around him. For royal supporters, this is where the story becomes bigger than headlines. It becomes about succession in emotional terms. Long before crowns change hands, public instinct begins deciding who feels central. That instinct can be wrong, but it can also be revealing. Right now, many supporters believe it is revealing something important. They believe William is no longer simply waiting for history. They believe history is beginning to lean toward him. And perhaps that is the clearest explanation of all. Control in the royal world is not always visible at first. It begins in attention, in deference, in public expectation, in the redistribution of confidence. It appears when supporters begin speaking of one figure as the answer before the institution has formally asked the question. By that measure, William does seem to be advancing faster than expected because the language around him has already changed. He is being discussed less like an heir in preparation and more like a leader in formation. That does not mean every supporter agrees on what comes next. Some see a gradual transition, others sense a sharper one, but they are united by the same core impression. William no longer feels distant from the center, he feels close to it, and in a monarchy built as much on perception as procedure, closeness to the center can become a form of power in its own right. So the real reason royal supporters believe William is taking control faster than expected is not just because he looks ready, it is because he makes the future feel present. He gives supporters the impression that the next chapter has begun to write itself through his tone, his discipline, and the growing authority people now attach to his name. Whether the palace chooses to describe it that way or not, many supporters already have, and once they do, the question is no longer whether William is stepping forward. The question is how much further forward he is.